Chapter 81. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. I want to design a ring that belongs to her and Nian Lai. 1, Translator. 549690339. Isn't that so? Young president is young and promising. His face is several times better looking than those top celebrities in the entertainment industry. We can't find many talents like him in the entire country. Of course, those young ladies below would be flocking to him. Secretary Lin smiled brightly and said, "He often sends you gifts, but after you came, I heard that Mr. Nian has confiscated all the gifts. He also forbade anyone from entering the president's office in their own name." The words, gift, were said rather vaguely. With his status, not to mention giving gifts, he even gave a lot of women. Thinking of the past, Ning Qing felt a little upset. But she knew that the past could not be traced back, just like herself. After exchanging a few words with Secretary Lin, she was called away. Ning Qing was bored, so she picked up the magazine on the table and began to read it. On the page, a huge diamond ring took up the entire cover. The title was Star Diamond, Heart of Eternity. It was the latest wedding ring from an international brand. It was said to be a limited edition, and there were only 2 of them in the world. Ning Qing looked at it carefully. The cut of the diamond was very beautiful. The pink diamond in the middle was rare and eye-catching. The outer ring was lined with a row of white diamonds in the center, and the arched design highlighted the center. The design of the entire ring was quite unique. She casually flipped through a few pages. Whether it was necklaces or bracelets, almost all of them had the same design. Ning Qing quite liked it. A while back, she had been really bored and wanted to find something to do. However, Nian Lai had not allowed her to do any tiring work. When she was flipping through the magazines, she realized that she was very interested in jewelry design, so she asked for his opinion. The man's reaction at that time was actually a little strange to Ning Qing. However, he didn't say anything and only said, "You can learn, I'll find someone to teach you. But you can't study for too long every day, or it'll be too tiring." She couldn't change his mind, so she agreed. Therefore, she only had 2 hours of study time every day. If she had 1 more minute, she would be ordered to stop. Fortunately, she was quite enthusiastic about this. Nian Lai knew exactly what she was up to, so he asked Lu Jue to subscribe to magazines and newspapers about the jewelry industry for her every week. In fact, Ning Qing had her own selfish motives. She wanted to design a ring herself after she learned it. It would be her and Nian Lai's wedding ring. Just as she was thinking, the door was suddenly pushed open. Lu Jue rushed in with an urgent look on his face. "Young madam." Ning Qing was frightened. "What's wrong with Ran? What's the rush?" Lu Jue walked up to her with a grave expression that he had never seen before. "Old master is here." Ning Qing's eyes widened. The person she was thinking about. Nian Lai's father. Lu Jue's brows were tightly knitted together. "This is an urgent matter. Please leave with me first. I'll explain everything to you when I get back." Ning Qing didn't know what was going on, and she clenched her fists. "Why, Bedodem, this is the young master's order." Ning Qing's eyes were a little complicated, and she started to panic. Why didn't Nian Lai allow her to see his father? Was it because he didn't like her? At this thought, Ning Qing did not dawdle any longer. She picked up her bag and followed Lu Jue. Unexpectedly, as soon as she opened the door, 3 men were standing outside. The leader was Butler Lu, whom Ning Qing had met before. The other 2 were wearing modified ancient servant clothes. They were tall and strong, with cold and stern faces. One look and one could tell they were not to be trifled with. Butler Lu's wrinkled face was very cold, and he still had that unreasonable appearance. Lu Jue's face turned pale when he was glanced at. Butler Lu said in a business-like manner, "Miss Ning, please wait." Master would like to see you. Chapter 82. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Nian Lai's mother and I have never acknowledged your identity. 1. Translator. 549690339. Lu Jue stood in front of Ning Qing. Young madam has an emergency. It's not convenient now. The man's muddy eyes looked over. Lu San, are you sure you want to stop him? Lu Jue's face was full of struggle, but under the man's intimidating gaze, he slowly put down the hand that was holding Ning Qing. I'm sorry, Dad, he said with a complicated expression. As soon as she said this, Ning Qing's gaze shifted from the two's faces. It turned out that they were father and son. Butler Lu hummed in agreement and looked at Ning Qing indifferently. Miss Ning, please come with me. Lu Jue had already lost the right to protect her. Ning Qing had no choice but to stop her back and follow his lead. Behind him, Lu Jue looked in the direction that the few of them had left and punched the wall. After a while, they stopped in the most hidden corner of the entire floor. Butler Lu opened the door for her and lowered his body slightly. Please. Ning Qing's palms were covered in a thin layer of sweat. She glanced at the end of the corridor, but there was no one there. She braced herself and walked into the room. It was very empty inside. Other than a mountain of documents, there was an armchair in the center. There was a man sitting on the chair. He was wearing an old gray tunic suit, a pair of pants of the same color, and a pair of shiny black leather shoes. The man's face was resolute and handsome. His eyes were closed, and he had thick eyebrows, a high nose, slightly protruding cheekbones, and slightly pursed lips. He looked energetic and did not look like a man in his 40s at all. He had his hands on the armrests of the armchair, a string of red Buddhist beads in his left hand, and a reddish-brown ring on his thumb. He looked very old, and his fingertips were twisting the string of beads evenly. Hearing the noise, he opened his eyes. Those pitch-black pupils were very similar to Nian Lai's. His gaze was cold and sharp, and he was not angry but still powerful. With just a glance, it could make your legs go soft and make you not dare to approach. Ning Qing glanced at the 4 burly men standing behind him, and fear crept up from the bottom of her heart. She had even forgotten how to address him. You didn't even greet your elders. The man's voice was like a great bell, steady but exuding a cold chill. Nian Junting stared at the reserved woman. He was clearly sitting, but he was looking at her with a condescending attitude. Miss Ning, you're indeed from a low-class family. You don't even have this bit of upbringing. An invisible pressure pressed down on Ning Qing. Her back was stiff and her lips were trembling. Daddy. Nian Junting raised his hand to stop her, his eyes as sharp as an eagle's. You don't have to call me that. Nian Lai's mother and I have never acknowledged your identity. Ning Qing's palms were wet, and the tip of her nose was covered in sweat. Her hands were clenched tightly. Nian Lai and I have registered our marriage. She said. We're officially husband and wife. Her voice was soft to begin with, and in comparison, it seemed even weaker and lacked confidence. Nian Junting lifted his eyelids. His cold words were not mocking, but they were more than mocking. It seems that Miss Ning doesn't have a clear understanding of herself. You're just my son's plaything. A marriage certificate is nothing to him. A few simple words hit Ning Qing's vital point. He taunted her family background and pointed out that her existence in the Nian family was dispensable. Her heart was pierced and she felt a tightness in her chest. Ning Qing pursed her lips, mustered her courage, and looked at the man on the armchair. The marriage certificate means that Nian Lai acknowledges me and that our relationship is protected by the law. Although the Nian family is a big family, all of us are protected by the country. The Nian family is protected by the country, and so is Mr. Nian. You, Chanshan, can't ignore the law. Chapter 83. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As far as I know, you're not the only woman my son has. Translator 549690339. The surroundings were deathly silent. These words coming out of the thin woman's mouth shocked everyone present. She was talking to the head of the Nian family, who had single-handedly founded the Nian family's business and controlled the business lifeline in the southeast region. Yet, she was being retorted by an ordinary woman. This Kasaya was simply a fantasy. Shut up. Even the experienced butler Lu couldn't hold it in any longer. How dare you? Two big men suddenly stepped forward, twisted Ning Qing's hands behind her back, and roughly pressed her down to kneel. Ning Qing felt the pain, and her face turned pale. What are you guys doing? Everyone ignored her. She felt pain in her legs as she was forced to kneel on the ground in an extremely humiliating manner. Frustration and shame rushed to her head. Ning Qing knew that she couldn't break free, so she gritted her teeth and said sarcastically, "So, this is how the Nian family treats others. Since you don't even give me the right to speak, why don't you tell me what you want me to do?" He still had such an aggressive tone. Butler Lu stepped forward with a stern expression. "Is my master someone that a lowly woman like you can slander as you please? I'll teach you a lesson on behalf of the master and the young master." As he spoke, he raised his hand high. Ning Qing couldn't avoid it. She shouted fearlessly, "We were born human. You and I are both human. Why should I be lowly and you be high and mighty?" She rolled her eyes hard and looked at the man who was still in a dignified posture. She sneered, "So there's a reason why he doesn't like to go home. If it were me, with a father like you, I'd rather stay away for the rest of my life than step into the house." All of a sudden, a frighteningly cold and sinister feeling coursed through his body. The entire space was filled with a terrifying aura. Butler Lu's eyes were wide open, and his raised hand was shaking. He knew that his old master was furious. Everyone knelt down in unison, not daring to raise their heads, including the two men who were holding Ning Qing. Nian Junting's face tensed up. Only the moment when he twisted the Buddha beads, one could see his anger. Ning Qing was finally free. She looked at the few people who were trembling in fear and pursed her dry lips. The person in the seat glanced at the crowd. When he passed Ning Qing's face, he paused for a second and left. "Enough," he said indifferently. Only then did those people stand up. Without anyone to control her, Ning Qing stood up as well. Her knee hurt from the impact. She raised her head and straightened her back, calmly looking at Nian Junting. The man's eyes were extremely intimidating, but perhaps Ning Qing was too angry and hot-blooded, so she didn't feel his threat and coldness at all. "As far as I know, you're not the only woman my son has," he said after a while. "I'd like to know what Miss Ning thinks about this." As expected of a person in the business world, he knew how to stab people's hearts. Ning Qing endured her discomfort, but her eyes were firm. "He promised me, I believe him." Nian Junting smiled strangely. He said with disdain and pity, "The little girl's mentality is not bad." "Didn't your mother tell you that you can't trust most of the men's words?" Ning Qing pursed her lips tightly and refused to admit defeat. "You're as na.ve as he is," Nian Junting said emotionlessly. As he stood up, the pressure from his height made Ning Qing hold her breath. Nian Junting walked towards her with steady steps. The agarwood fragrance on her body was the same as the one in the Nian family's old residence. "I hope that after you know everything, you can still say what you said today with such confidence." Chapter 84. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Do you really want to fall into the hands of the Ning family your whole life? Translator 549690339. The group of people left one after another. Ning Qing stood where she was, her whole body cold. Nian Lai and Lu Jue rushed in and saw her standing there in a daze. Nian Lai's throat rolled, but he could not say a word. The movement of approaching was as light as a feather. Ning Qing, the woman turned around. Her palm-sized face was pale, and her forehead was wet with sweat. She closed her eyes and almost fell. Fortunately, Nian Yu reacted quickly and pulled her into his arms. His voice was filled with pain, and his eyes were like a storm. "How are you?" Ning Qing grabbed his shirt and shook her head weakly. Nian Lai's worried gaze swept across her face. "Did he attack you?" she asked, gritting her teeth. Ning Qing was afraid that he would misunderstand her. She frowned and denied it. Neither did Ran. His face was frighteningly dark. "Nian Lai," Ning Qing said weakly, "my legs are weak." He suddenly retracted the coldness that burst out from his body. "Yen Zun, bow." He lifted her up horizontally. She lay in his arms, trying to calm the fear that was running through her limbs. He went back to his office and sat on the sofa. Lu Jue brought her a cup of hot water. Ning Qing thanked him and held the heat source in her hand. She was frightened. When he received this message, Nian Lai's heart sank to the bottom of the lake. He felt suffocated, and his face was extremely dark. "What did he say to you?" Ning Qing's long and curled eyelashes fluttered quickly. She did not answer. Instead, she asked, "Are you not on good terms with your parents?" It would have been better if she hadn't asked, but the moment she did, the coldness on the man's body instantly exploded, and the surrounding temperature plummeted. "Isn't it obvious enough?" Nian Yu's eyes were deep and dark. Ning Qing thought of the photo in his lounge. He was such a young child, and the smile on her face disappeared. Her heart felt as if it had been pierced by a needle, and some heartache overflowed, but she didn't know where to start. The relationship between him and his parents seemed to be in conflict. It was obvious that Nian Lai didn't want to talk about this topic either. Ning Qing held the hot water and took a sip. The heat entered his stomach and warmed his cold body. "A little." She gave him a comforting smile. "But it's all good now." Her forced smile was reflected in his dark eyes. He pursed his thin lips and reached out to hold hers. He said with deep meaning, "I will protect you." No matter what method he used. Ning Qing's heart trembled, and she felt a little strange. Before she could think further, Nian Lai had already pulled her into his arms. She couldn't see his face, so naturally, she couldn't see his cold and terrifying expression, nor his dark and cold eyes that could stir up thousands of clouds. At night, at Yunyan No. 1. Nian Lai was working in the study, while Ning Qing was curled up in bed, taking a course on network design. At 11:00, Ning Qing felt sleepy. She yawned and looked at the time. Nian Lai had yet to return to his room. She got out of bed and went to the study. The door of the study was ajar. The cold light poured in through the crack of the door and fell on the black ground, making it look even colder. The man's unique voice was dull and low. "I said, don't touch her." On the other end of the phone was a threatening voice that couldn't be stopped even from a distance away. It was cold and terrifying. "Nian Lai, I'm your father. What kind of tone are you using to talk to me?" It was Nian Junting. The corners of Nian Lai's lips twitched as he smiled sarcastically, his smile as cold as winter. "You're my father, so you have to care about my opinions and opinions." Nian Junting narrowed his eyes. "Are you blaming me for interfering in your affair with that woman today?" His tone didn't sound like he was talking to his son at all, but more like a boss-subordinate relationship, without any warmth to speak of. "If I don't care about you, do you really want to be in the hands of the Ning family for the rest of your life?" Chapter 85. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Divorce her as soon as possible and come back to inherit the Nian family. 1. Translator 549690339. Nian Lai smiled coldly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Even if I'm not controlled by outsiders, I'll still be controlled by you and mother. What's the difference? Nian Junting hated his attitude. In this life, he had planned everything out and everything was within his control. The only accident was the rebellious son he and Song Wan had. If I were you, I wouldn't be so boastful as to say such a thing, he warned. Nian she lit a cigarette and stood by the window, staring at the dark night sky. The moon was bright and the stars were few. The ground was covered in white frost. Nian Lai, you're so protective of her. No one in the Ning family will appreciate your kindness. What was the point of him doing this? Just for that so-called hypocritical and absurd love. Nian Lai's eyes were dark, even more peaceful than the night outside. You won't understand, he said. Nian Junting found it ridiculous. You want to contend against me. You've thought it through. Nian Ing took a sip of his cigarette and blew out white smoke. He knew that it was not the time yet. You're thinking too much. How would I dare, he said with a faint smile. Her sudden change in attitude made Nian Junting fall silent. Whatever you say, he didn't have the time to think about whether his words were true or false, and only coldly ordered, divorce her as soon as possible and come back to inherit the Nian family. Nian Shi's eyes were filled with waves of anger, and his handsome face was dark. However, there was a terrifying smile on her lips. I will consider it. The call was cut off. White smoke came out of his mouth, blurring his expression. Stop hiding, come in, he said. At the door, Ning Qing was stunned for a moment before she pushed the door open and entered. With a careful expression, she said, I saw that you hadn't returned to your room yet, so I came to take a look. He turned his back to her, neither happy nor angry. Nian Lai, what's wrong with you? Ning Qing walked up to him. She could sense that he was in a bad mood. Was it because of the phone call just now? I'm fine. The cigarette butt was snuffed out on the window frame. He turned around and held her shoulders as they walked to the desk. I'll show you something. His mysterious look eased Ning Qing's tight heart. She smiled. What is it? His long legs hooked the chair away, and Nian Yu lowered his head, leaning close to her neck, breathing warm air. He used his chin to point at the drawer. Open it and take a look. Ning Qing followed the instructions and opened the drawer. Inside, a square gift box was placed in the center. She glanced at him from the side, took it out and opened it under his encouragement. A dazzling pink diamond ring came into view. Ning Qing had never expected him to give her a ring, and it was the heart of eternity that she had just seen today. Her throat kept trembling, and the surprise and joy in her eyes could not be concealed. Do you like it? Nian Lai asked gently. His arms around her waist. Ning Qing's lips moved a few times, and she could not help but reply, I like it. NBSP, he curled his lips and chuckled, his eyes overflowing with tenderness. He reached out to hold her hand from behind and took out the ring. Let's try. The moment she was about to put it on, Ning Qing's fingers shrank back. Nian Lai's smile faded. She hurriedly explained, no, it's too precious. I'm sorry. Nian Lai's narrow eyes glanced at her, and his words were unquestionable. Ning Qing, put it on. But in Luo, she had planned to design a ring for the two of them. Besides, the ring for him and Ning Su was still in her drawer. Nian Lai didn't like her hesitation. For some reason, he stubbornly held her fingers and put them on. It was just right. Ning Qing's fingers were even, slender, and beautiful, and her skin was fair. After putting on the ring, it was undoubtedly an additional flower on top of a brocade, beautiful to the extreme. It's beautiful, Nian Lai praised sincerely. As she listened to his words of admiration, the knot in Ning Qing's heart disappeared. She also smiled. Thank you, I like it very much. What about your return gift? Ning Qing was stunned and turned her neck to look at him. There was a certain emotion in his eyes, one that was familiar yet foreign to her. Chapter 86. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ning Qing, always believe in me. 1. Translator. 549690339. At this moment, the back that was pressed against his body was slowly burning. The heat rose from the bottom to the top, infecting the cool air around him. His large palm caressed her waist through the fabric, and Ning Qing trembled. His scorching hot kiss fell on her. No room for rejection. She was dizzy. When she came back to her senses, she was already lying on the large desk. She looked up and could only see the cold light that was shining down on her, so bright that she could barely open her eyes. In front of her eyes was his face that was as handsome as a god. Nian Lai, Qian. She seemed to have noticed something, and her entire body trembled like a sieve. He hugged her back tightly, his voice hoarse and magnetic, tempting her to sink in. Are you willing to? The sweat on his forehead fell and landed on her chest. Ning Qing's eyes were filled with love and she was flustered. Her thick, seaweed-like long hair was scattered on the desk, reflecting her snow-white skin and peach-red cheeks. She suddenly recalled the time she had set him up. She knew that he had been drugged, but she still deliberately found a strange woman to come to his door in order to get hold of him and force him to divorce her. Also, he had once stayed out all night, spending all those days and nights with Bai Qingqing. Ning Qing had to admit that she did mind. Very much. Her slightly swollen lips trembled. My Yingluo can't. Her heart ached at the thought of it. As her feelings for him became clearer, the pain became more and more intense and unbearable. How could Nian Lai not see through her thoughts? He only said in a hoarse voice, only you. Ning Qing's eyes widened. What did he mean by that? It's always been you. Some information exploded in Ning Qing's mind. She was caught off guard and could not speak clearly. You didn't have a fight with them. Nian Lai's lips twitched into a smile. His face, which had been enduring silently, was slightly distorted. It was flushed, unlike usual. Never, he said with difficulty. Believe me, Ning Qing. Always believe me. She was suddenly speechless, and her hand with the ring intertwined with his. Then, with tears in her eyes, her voice broke. It was a passionate night. And it was a long time. The next day. In the master bedroom, the black curtains were drawn tightly, and not a single ray of light could enter. It was quite messy on the ground, and the clothes of a man and a woman were all over the place, showing the sweetness and relationship between the two. On the bed, the woman's snow-white shoulders were exposed. Her long eyelashes drooped down, and she was sleeping beautifully. Nian Lai stood at the side, tall and straight. His shoulders were broad and his waist was strong. The muscles in his waist, abdomen, and arms were lean and strong. One look and one could tell that he had a strong explosive power. He slowly put on his shirt and buttoned it up one by one until the last button. The woman on the bed seemed to be disturbed by something. She frowned slightly and let out a moan. He paused and sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes full of tenderness. He leaned over and kissed her red lips. Qingqing, trust me. The woman's head rubbed against the pillow, but there was no sign of her being awake. His eyes were filled with complicated emotions as he caressed her face. Then, he regained his solemn and cold expression. He stood up and left. On the bed, the eyelashes of the woman who was sleeping soundly trembled slightly. Then, he opened his cold and clear eyes, but there was no sleepiness in them. Ning Qing reached out her smooth and slender arm and turned on the bedside lamp. Downstairs, the car sped away. The man's teasing and meaningful words seemed to ring in her ears. She got used to the light and slowly got up. He licked his dry lips with the tip of his tongue and lifted the thin blanket on his body. Underneath, her long and fair legs were crossed, and the black sheets were wrinkled because of her movements, as dark as the night. He looked around, but he didn't find Luo Hong. Dot. Her white teeth bit her red lips, and her face was pale, making it difficult to tell her expression. Chapter 87. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. I thought you had forgotten about me after not seeing me for so many days. Translator 549690339. Nian's group. Nian Lai stood in front of the huge French window, with Lu Jue standing behind him. Miss Bai is out on a fresh case this afternoon. It's around 5:00. She's asking you out for dinner tonight. Nian Lai looked at the tall building in the distance, his expression calm. A few minutes later, he said, clear out the night. NBSP, Lu Jue lowered his head and replied, yes. Book a private room at Jingyue and buy her something she likes. Yes. Lu Jue looked at Nian Lai's unreadable expression and said awkwardly, young master, if we do this, what about young madam? Nian Lai's hands were half clenched behind his back. For a long time, he did not speak. Ning Qing called Nian Lai for the entire afternoon, but no one picked up. After panicking for a long time, she finally called Lu Jue, only to be told, young master is in a meeting and has a social event to attend tonight. You don't have to wait anymore. There was no, then. A social event. Why didn't he tell her? She had clearly received a response, but Ning Qing still felt very depressed, as if something big was going to happen. She thought for a moment, then instructed the servant and left. 10 minutes later, they arrived at the Nian Corporation's building. Just as she was about to get out of the car, she saw Nian Lai walk out of the main entrance. Surrounded by a group of bodyguards, his handsome face was filled with a warning that no one should approach him. Because she was in a hurry, her skirt was stuck. She could only watch as Nian Lai got into the car. The fleet of cars drove off in a certain direction in an orderly manner. Ning Qing had no choice but to ask the driver to follow them. She looked at the car in front of her as she called him. But in the end, the phone rang thousands of times, and no one picked up. Outside Jingyue. The setting sun gave the city an orange glow, and the shadows of the trees on the roadside were elongated. Time seemed to have slowed down. Nian Lai stood in the middle of the bodyguards. His perfect figure and face were easy to spot. He looked down at his phone, frowned impatiently, and hung up. Ning Qing had seen everything clearly. Her palms turned cold. Just as she was about to get out of the car, another car stopped in front of Nian Lai. Ning Qing watched as he smiled and opened the car door for the man. He looked gentlemanly and gentle, which she had seen every day recently. His eyes suddenly stung. The person in the car stretched out her slender long legs, and a pink dress slipped out with her movements, followed by a curvaceous figure. Above him was a face that Ning Qing was extremely familiar with. Bai Qingqing put her hand in Nian Shi's hand, pouting. She chided her. Why didn't you come and pick me up personally? I'm not happy. Even though she said that, her body leaned toward the man honestly. Nian Lai took the opportunity to put his arm around her waist. He lowered his eyes and smiled as he coaxed her. Have an emergency meeting in the afternoon. Can't make it. Didn't I ask Lu Jue to pick you up? Bai Qingqing pouted, still angry. His boss is so shameless. I don't like him. He looked at her with a cold gaze. Lu Jue lowered his head and apologized. I'm sorry, Miss Bai. I will be more careful in the future. The woman snorted and leaned into Nian Lai's arms, her fingers fiddling with the button at his throat. You haven't come to see me for so many days. I thought you had forgotten about me. Nian Lai grabbed her restless hand and said patiently and gently, you were the one who said that you wanted to focus on pursuing your dreams. I'll be disturbing you if I come. Bai Qingqing was unhappy. In any case, you didn't come to see me. I'm angry. I'm not angry, huh? Nian Shi held her in his arms, a mesmerizing smile on his face. I brought you a gift. See if you like it. He took the gift bag from the bodyguard and handed it to the woman. Bai Qingqing took it and glanced at it inattentively, then broke into a smile. She tiptoed and pecked his cheek. Thank you, baby. I ordered your favorite dishes, Nian Lai said in a low voice. Can we go in first? Bai Qingqing nodded happily and followed him in. Chapter 88. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Then why don't you just divorce and marry me? 1. Translator. 549690339. On the side of the road, in the car. When Ning Qing saw those scenes, she felt like she had fallen into an ice cellar, and her whole body turned cold. She watched as he gave the warmth he had given himself to another woman without hesitation. So, it was because Bai Qingqing wasn't around these few days that he was treating her so well. Then what was last night? What did the words he said count for? Lowering her trembling eyelashes, Ning Qing's watery eyes fell on the diamond ring on her finger. The ring was beautiful and resplendent, reflecting a faint pink light. She suddenly smiled, sad and helpless. This period of warmth was just an illusion he gave. Although she thought this way, Ning Qing did not want to believe that it was true. She had to hear him admit it himself. Hence, the car was parked outside Jingyue. It stopped for 2 hours. After a long time, the swaying woman walked out with Nian Lai's help. Bai Qingqing turned around and wrapped her arms around the man's neck. Are you really not going to accompany me tonight? Nian Lai held her waist with one hand and grabbed her arm with the other, stopping her from leaning forward. I still have an important business meeting later. Bai Qingqing fixed her gaze on him and said coyly, nothing will happen if you bring me there. Don't tell me you don't want others to know about our relationship. Do they not know enough? The man's eyes dimmed when he saw her unhappy expression. Ing Luo, your career is on the rise now. If this gets out, it'll affect your career. Then why don't you just get a divorce and marry me? She said these words very lightly. A glint flashed across Nian Lai's dark eyes. His lips curled up slightly as he said with interest, you really want to marry me that much? Bai Qingqing raised her chin and arrogantly expressed her possessiveness towards him. Of course. You can only be mine. She hugged him tightly, and the man also hugged her waist tightly. Dong heard a bewitching voice, I'll listen to you. After exchanging a few more words, Nian Yu got into the car and left. Bai Qingqing said goodbye to him reluctantly. Just as she was about to get into the car and leave, her phone suddenly rang. When he saw the call, a hint of slyness and pleasure flashed across his innocent and flawless face. Her eyes were filled with arrogance and coldness as she picked up the phone. Hello, he said. The ending note was dragged out. He had also done his part. We can meet. Where are you? On the other side of the road, in the car, Bai Qingqing was stunned for a moment. She looked over with her light eye makeup on and smiled gently. Then, she walked over in her high heels. He opened the door and sat inside. Ning Qing asked the driver to get out of the car. Bai Qingqing crossed her legs and crossed her arms in front of her chest, her posture very high. Tell me, what's the matter? He was clearly the one who had stepped in, but he actually displayed such an arrogant attitude. For a moment, Ning Qing didn't know where to start. Bai Qingqing glanced at her. Her pouted pink lips twitched slightly. She asked in a seemingly casual manner, you don't dare to speak. Don't tell me you followed Mr. Nian here. The blood on Ning Qing's face faded away at a speed visible to the naked eye. She tensed her back and warned herself not to be confused by her words. He took a deep breath, turned around, and met her disdainful gaze. You and him, what's going on? What do you mean by what happened? Ning Qing clenched her fists. Didn't Jinjin break up with you? When Nian Lai had made his stand clear to her, he should have handled his relationship with Bai Qingqing well. Why would he have a Han Qing now? Upon hearing this, Bai Qingqing looked at her as if she was looking at a lunatic. Who said that I've broken up with Mr. Nian? I'm only joining the production team to film a movie. Mr. Nian was the one who gave me that role. Chapter 89. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ning Qing, I'm pregnant. Translator. 549690339. The sharp blade instantly pierced through his heart. Ning Qing clutched her thigh tightly, her nails piercing through the fabric, and the pain was clear. You only joined the crew to film. Her words were broken into pieces. Bai Qingqing was confused. She found it funny. What else did you think? She asked. She rolled her eyes at her and was rather speechless. Ning Qing could not help but feel a dull pain in her chest. She couldn't believe that Nian Lai had been lying to her about everything that had happened. He clutched his heart and looked at the woman with grief and anger. You've been in contact with him all this time. No, I didn't. Bai Qingqing didn't understand what was going on with her behavior. She only felt that she was a little scary, so she said rather honestly, my crew is out of town and the environment is very bad. There's no internet connection, no phones or computers, and it's almost completely sealed off. How am I supposed to contact him? When she had gone there, she had also been puzzled. She didn't understand why Nian Lai had given her such a role. If he hadn't said that she would be nominated for the Best Supporting Actress award after acting in this movie, she wouldn't have stayed in that godforsaken place for so long. The woman was so innocent, as if she knew nothing about her relationship with Nian Lai. Ning Qing thought of something, and her heart almost shattered. She held on to a glimmer of hope and forced herself to control her emotions, which were on the verge of collapse. Then you don't know about Nian Lai and my Hanin. At this point, she choked. However, he could not continue. Are you talking about the time when Mr. Nian confessed to you in front of everyone? These light words came out of Bai Qingqing's mouth and didn't carry any weight. Bai Qingqing blinked her curled eyelashes, her beautiful eyes exuding innocence. She was actually good looking. She was the kind of pure type that was rare in the entertainment industry. She was like a white lotus, growing out of the mud without being stained, and no one could bear to profane her. However, his appearance was only on the surface. This woman looked innocent, but she was scheming and evil. I know. She said nonchalantly. After she returned, her manager told her about the news. At first, she was very angry. She hated Ning Qing for using underhanded means to make Nian Lai make the promise that she had begged for thousands of times when she was not around. She even wanted to rush to her and tear her apart. However, after Nian Lai's arrival, everything was a different story. It turned out that as long as she was around, there would be no other woman in Nian Jin's eyes. She would not allow him to have other women. A myriad of venomous thoughts and schemes sprang to her heart. Bai Qingqing smiled brightly and leaned closer to Ning Qing. But so what if he said those words to you? The moment I came back, didn't he come to see me without stopping? Ning Qing, you've lost. Her words were like sharp arrows, each sentence piercing her heart, as if she would not stop until her heart died. Bai Qingqing could tell that she was sad and gloated over her misfortune. Besides, Mr. Nian has just promised to marry me. The bone-chilling cold was like an electric current, quickly passing through her limbs, and Ning Qing trembled in pain. A hand as white as jade reached out. In her blurry vision, the light powder between her fingers was so dazzling that it pierced through Ning Qing's heart. It was her heart of eternity. No, no, no. It was the second one after hers. Ning Qing laughed, and tears filled her eyes. There were actually 2 rings that represented eternity. Did that mean that a person's love could also be split into 2? Nian Lai, Nian Lai. How could you do this to me? Bai Qingqing's finger, which was wearing a huge diamond ring, ran a finger through her stray hair. She raised her chin, her voice soft and sweet, and there was an unconcealable malice and provocation in her eyes. Do you want to know why? Under Ning Qing's dead, empty gaze, she smiled. Because I'm pregnant. Chapter 90. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Although this ring is pretty, it's unlucky to be the same as yours. 1. Translator. 549690339. Ning Qing felt her ears buzz, and she could not hear anything. She could not move, her blood seemed to have stopped flowing, and her mind was blank. He just looked at the other person stiffly. A piece of paper flew over and hit her face. She lowered her head in a daze and looked at the test report on her thigh. Here. If you don't believe me, you can take it to the hospital to verify its authenticity. Bai Qingqing's casual words were already the best form of confirmation for this list. If she was lying, how could she be so calm? Ning Qing was glad that she had managed to retain the last of her rationality in the face of Nian Lai's betrayal and had not rushed up to the woman to fight. She pinched the paper, and the pink ring entered her eyes. It turned out that the ring was mocking her for being ridiculous and that she deserved it. Clearly, Bai Qingqing had seen it too. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. Why do you have one too? After she finished speaking, she let out an "oh" and glanced at her from the corner of her eyes. Her entire face was filled with ridicule. Mr. Nian gave it to you, right? Sigh, I said I only wanted something unique in this world, but I didn't expect him to buy two at once. Ning Qing's lips were pale, and her face was equally pale. Even though her facial features were delicate, it could not hide her sorrow and despair. Bai Qingqing furrowed her brows and sized up her ring, then looked at Ning Qing's, her disdain obvious. This ring is beautiful, but, TSK, it's unlucky to have the same ring as yours. Even if yours is a supplementary pill, I still find it disgusting. She pulled out the ring, opened the window, and threw it out. Without any hesitation. Bai Qingqing. Ning Qing squeezed out her name from her painful throat, her red eyes staring at her. What, you want to hit me? This time, Bai Qingqing wasn't afraid at all. She even put her face in front of her eyes and smiled. I'll give you a chance. But don't say that I didn't warn you. I'm carrying Mr. Nian's child. Nothing could be more ruthless than this. Ning Qing was already numb to the pain. Even she could not tell where the despair and pain in her heart came from. Her mind was extremely clear, so the pain that was originally only 30% was forcibly increased to 70% or 80%. Her tears suddenly fell. He split open his face, held his breath, and expelled, "You go." Bai Qingqing was stunned. She was crying. She wasn't a good person, so she naturally wouldn't let her off just because she cried. Ning Qing, think about it carefully. Mr. Nian and I already have a child. If you don't leave on your own, it'll be very embarrassing when I come to your house with the child. With that, he pushed the door open and left. The car door was slammed shut with a bang. His heart ached to the point of numbness. Ning Qing took deep breaths, and her tears kept falling. The test sheet was crumpled to pieces, almost biting into her palm. The whole carriage was filled with her heartbroken cries, and all the passerby looked at her. After a long time, everything returned to silence. The driver returned to the car. The person in the back seat was very quiet, as if the person who had been crying so hard that she couldn't make a sound a few minutes ago wasn't her at all. Ning Qing's eyes were red and swollen, and her voice was hoarse. Go back. Yes. The car returned to the main road and slowly drove away. She returned to Yunhuang No. 1, exhausted. The moment she entered, she saw the man sitting in the living room. Nian Lai's dark eyes glanced over. His eyes, which could see through everything, made Ning Qing stop. He got up and walked over. Every step he took seemed to be crushing her fragile heart. When he was in front of her, He sharply caught her red eyes and the unconcealable sadness. "Where did you go?" he asked.